Speaking Human.
Today on Speaking Human, we plug into the marketing power of Nintendo's new retro gaming system, the NES Classic Edition, and then push start on our favorite NES Classic games. Jump on a Goomba and eat a magic mushroom because this podcast is about to power up.
Speaking Human.
Welcome to Speaking Human, where we simplify the world of marketing for humans. I'm Shad Conley, and you can make me sound much more intelligent on this podcast by pressing up, up, down, down, left, right, BA start on your device right now.
And I'm Patrick Jebber, and I love when capitalism leads to a feeding frenzy for nostalgia. Let's face it, people, nothing is as good as we remember it.
Or is everything better than we remember it? God, it was so good back then. The good old days.
The good old days, man. Playing Nintendo.
8-bit video games. You're like, man, I hope they never improve on these in any way.
I hope they always look this crappy.
In case you haven't guessed it already, on today's episode, we're talking Nintendo. Original Nintendo, that is, served up in a new pint-sized package that has gamers and holiday gift buyers foaming at the mouth. So Patrick, Nintendo, are you a fan of it? Original Nintendo from the 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, I love the original Nintendo. I was fortunate enough to get a Nintendo when they first came out.
When they first came out?
Yeah, well, when they first, the major release within the U.S., my sister worked at a department store and was able to set one aside for a Christmas present. So I felt pretty fortunate at the time anyway.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I remember we were a few years late on Nintendo, so it came a few years later to our family. I think it came out somewhere, I want to say around 86 or somewhere around there.
Yeah, it had some early starts. They did the test market in New York City originally. Sometime, I think, the next year or so, they started releasing it throughout the country, but...
For our generation, this is our generation's gaming system. I mean, it's almost impossible to talk about objectively because it just comes from that time of youth where Nintendo was just part of life, you know what I mean?
If you were a kid in the 80s and maybe even early 90s, you knew about Nintendo. I mean, Nintendo was everywhere.
Yeah, that'd be a good question. Was there any kid from that time period who grew up, who was around the age of probably, 7 to 18, who... you would say Nintendo, and they'd be like, what's that? I can't picture it.
I can't either. I mean, it would be like saying, do you know what an iPhone is today, I feel like.
Yeah, where even if you don't have one, you're familiar with it. Mm-hmm. You probably know Super Mario Brothers. You probably know some of the games, but you definitely... the Nintendo brand and what it was at that time was just a huge part of culture, especially for kids.
To us, because we were the kids they were marketing to.
And it worked. I mean, these things sold like gangbusters. Of course, at that time, there wasn't a whole lot of competition around. You're talking about the post-Atari era. Nintendo just owned the video game space, the home video game space, I guess. So what are your, memories of Nintendo? Do you look back on it fondly? Or do you think, man, that sucked? Or do you look back and you're like, oh, what great games. I had so much fun playing Nintendo. I miss that.
I mean, I have fond memories of it. I really, one vivid memory I have is how my stepfather and my cousin became addicted to The Legend of Zelda. You remember that game?
Very addictive game, yeah.
They hijacked my room. They were playing that game for weeks. And I clearly remember falling asleep to them playing the game and then waking up in the middle of the night and they were still playing. Even the next morning, when everybody was leaving the house. One weekend, we were supposed to go to dinner as a family, and my stepfather couldn't leave the game because he was too far along in it, and if he came back, He was going to lose his place. Because if you remember, you couldn't save your games.
You had to get to a save point, right?
Yeah, well, and in Zelda, for whatever reason, there was glitches in the game, so a lot of times if you would lose all your progress, and you'd spend hours playing a game and nothing to show for it. You never really had anything to show for it anyway, But a great example of how those early games, laid the groundwork for future gamer generations,
Yeah, and I don't even know, have games really even changed that much from those initial formats? The games were no less addictive. They might even have been more addictive back then. That's some of the stuff that I think about with Nintendo. It's just these slew of memories, I remember getting bad games, like the bargain bin games for Christmas. and being like, oh. And I remember going to other kids' houses and they'd have all these, a collection of awesome games. And I'd be like, let me borrow these. I need to play some good games,
Yeah.
I also remember, do you remember the Power Pad?
I do remember that. I didn't have that, but I do remember a couple kids who did. They were very gimmicky, I feel like, compared to the actual system itself.
Yeah, but it was part of this whole world around Nintendo. Like we had some fun with the Power Pad. There was even the Nintendo gun with Duck Hunt, which nobody used all that much.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was this whole other almost ecosystem around it where you had like Nintendo Power Magazine and you had, what was that movie with Fred Savage?
It was called The Wizard.
The Wizard, where they were going to like the Nintendo championships.
Oh,
Do you know what
yeah.
I'm talking
Yeah.
about?
No, that's funny. It was a world in and of itself, right?
There was also, like a cartoon, Captain N, the Game Master. We talked about animated brand characters on our show last week and how they seeped into the culture. Nintendo's definitely a brand that spread out its tentacles throughout culture, and, kids were just into it in all forms.
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't get away from it even if you tried. That's why, like you said, I can't imagine a person who is, at least in our generation, who wouldn't remember the Nintendo or know what it is.
I don't even consider myself a person who's hugely into video games, historically, but I played a ton of Nintendo.
And it's funny because that original gaming console would never have flown today. You know how you had those cartridges and you'd have to blow on them because sometimes they would get glitchy?
There's a lot of glitches to it. I'm surprised I didn't mention that up front in my memories. That is my strongest memory of Nintendo, is trying to get a game to work and you can't. So you're the tactic of trying to blow dust out of the cartridge and then trying to blow into the Nintendo to make it work. Whether that actually worked at all, I don't know, but everybody did it.
Yeah.
You try to move the game around in there. It's just crazy how that technology worked back then and the frustrations that caused.
The frustration is, oddly enough, it's probably one of my fondest memories because thinking back to that as a kid, blowing in that, and then also like when you get so frustrated, you jam the cartridge in there and you'd slam it, push it in, and then push it down to get it to go in, and you'd be slamming it down inside there. I mean, clearly not a great idea from a technology standpoint to slam things and force them. And looking back, I think that's hilarious that we'd had to do that to make the thing work.
Yeah, and it just seems so old-fashioned now. How mechanically it worked as compared to games today.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the whole system and the blowing. Anybody who had Nintendo knows the frustration of trying to blow the dust. I guess you were blowing the dust. I don't know what you were doing exactly, but everybody did it.
You were probably just spitting in it and creating a bigger problem.
Making it worse?
Yeah, making it worse. So, anyway.
So from that, what are your current thoughts on the Nintendo brand then? You have your nostalgia and your memories from back then, but what do you think about Nintendo now?
Well, I think the brand today is iconic because of the history of it. I don't think they have near the success of that original console with each new release, but they definitely make every attempt to be relevant in today's, what I would call, competitive gaming console landscape. They're always trying to be innovative, the Wii and the Wii U and the Game Boy. But I mean, it's a brand worth $18.4 billion. So, I mean, it's definitely not doing too bad.
And it's hung around. I think the weird thing is, given the history, you would expect it to be the gaming leader, where it's fallen behind PlayStation and Xbox. Mm-hmm. They had a one-hit wonder with the Wii, which was another one of these huge products that just blew up for a while. And then, as it became a novelty, faded away. But they just haven't managed to compete with the big guys, They've done some good things. The brand has stuck around. There's still that name recognition, but they're just not quite as big as they used to be, at least. You'd think they'd still have a top-level spot in the gaming world, and I think they're just one notch below that. They're just, like you said, they keep trying, but they're just not quite there anymore.
Well, and I'm sure there's a lot of factors that I know the graphics on the Nintendos just have never competed with the higher end consoles today, like the PlayStations and the Xboxes. I mean, so it's a totally different gaming experience altogether. And I think that in and of itself is probably a strength and a weakness, at the same time, because of who they're catering to. You know what I mean?
Yeah. To their credit, they have tried to do things differently with gaming systems. That's kind of what made the Wii a success. It was doing something different. Mm-hmm. And then they flopped with the Wii U, the follow-up to that, but they are trying to do things outside of what Xbox and PlayStation are doing, to their credit.
Yeah, absolutely. But they keep hanging in there. And this year, they were reported that $18.4 billion that I mentioned, they're worth now more than Sony. Who would have thought that? You know, they do own Pokemon, the Pokemon company.
Yeah, that's the big one. They had that. Pokemon Go was huge.
Yeah, that was a huge unexpected sensation / success, this year. But, they're not doing too bad.
Nintendo, now they're taking us back to the past to move a whole bunch of product.
Yeah. So in a minute, we'll talk about the marketing draw of the NES Classic Edition and the impact of the words sold out on the minds of shoppers. But first, let's get a quick word from our sponsor.
Today's episode of Speaking Human is sponsored by Monsters Unlimited, a creative agency with a business brain. When you need to promote your products so fast that you can't keep up with the demand, use the creative team at Monsters Unlimited. Visit thinkmonsters.com for more information.
So, Patrick, let's talk about the NES Classic Edition. So, for those of you who don't know, the NES Classic Edition is just what it sounds like. It's a smaller version of the original Nintendo system with 30 games already preloaded on there, 30 classic games, as they say. Now, this product launched on November 11th, which is about a week ago from when we're recording now, and instantly sold out everywhere. On Amazon, in stores, and demand has been higher than the supply ever since. So it's pretty hard to find one. They're selling on eBay for like $200. It's basically become the holiday product of the year, I would say.
Yeah, I'd totally agree with that. They timed this just right.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Are you surprised at all by the popularity of this product?
I'm not surprised at all. I mean, again, we're sort of coming from the target audience back in the 80s. Now we're adults. The reality is that kids from 30 years ago have the means to buy this. Even if you didn't have one yourself when you were a kid, that's probably all the more reason why it's so successful, is because now you want one, you can afford it, because you're not a kid anymore, and it's economical enough that you'll probably get one just to satisfy that desire to relive your past.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I'm drawn to this, and I think it would be like it'd be something awesome to get somebody as a gift, because it's just small, it's relatively affordable, and it's pretty cool and interesting. But it's still a novelty. It's nothing new. It's something we've seen before. It's old games with old graphics. It has that nostalgia factor to it, but I'm surprised by just how popular it is. I don't know how many of these systems they produced for launch, but the fact that it's sold out and has people like clamoring for it, it's definitely surprising to me. I think it's a little more popular than I thought it would be when I first saw this product announced.
I don't know why, but I really anticipated this. I knew that it was going to be big. I even told my wife, at the time, I was like, this is coming out this week. And she's not a gamer at all. And she was super excited. But I told her, I said, this is coming out. I would, go and see if you could get it at the store. She called the store and they were basically like, yeah, there's a line around the building right now, and we only have 10 of these. And they're like, so we're already sold out. Nintendo is known for doing this too. You know what I mean? The supply is always constrained.
And, maybe what you mentioned with your wife, maybe that speaks to the widespread appeal of this that I didn't quite see. I saw the nostalgia factor, but then you have the fact that Nintendo and these kind of simpler games are more appealing to a wider audience than your typical gaming audience. Plus, you also have, it's probably appealing to the older nostalgia people like us, and younger people are interested in this too, because even younger people today have this curiosity about the past, and, because they have access to all these things, that there's probably a higher interest level even from that group than I would have anticipated.
That's definitely true. I think getting a retro game is actually kind of cool to them. But I think even more so what you said, the older generation, even people who are older than us, especially when you're playing with a bunch of people, which is kind of what Nintendo always was about. You're not only playing yourself, but you're playing with other people.
Yeah, and this is probably one of those things, especially as like a Christmas present. You could have parents playing with kids. Mm-hmm. You're both enjoying it, where you probably wouldn't do that necessarily with Xbox, at least not every family.
Yeah. It's that limited supply, though, man. That created that fever for the flavor of a Nintendo, not Pringles.
You're right. You're right, though. Nintendo obviously has a history of this. The Wii is a big example. Back in its peak in 2008, for almost like the whole year, it was hard to get one, which, just fueled that fire and made people want it more. I guess that begs the question. Let me ask you, do you think Nintendo does this on purpose?
Oh, yeah. They're not stupid. Like, in my opinion, Nintendo used just an age-old marketing tactic to make this thing bigger than it really is. You have the hype, which, they didn't have to do a lot. The internet had a good deal of buzz about the release. So the hype was pretty high. They didn't have to do all that much to feed that. But then think about it. They didn't release this on Black Friday, which a lot of products do come out that Black Friday because they're trying to get that holiday rush. They released it 2 weeks prior. And now it sells out immediately. And you have people who are certainly shopping for the holidays, scouring the earth on Black Friday. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a decent supply in stores on Black Friday. It'll be one of the hottest tech toys of the season for sure, like you said. I think they totally knew.
Think of the idea of doing that as an intentional marketing tactic. I'm like, it's very possible, especially when you lay out the timeline like that, how they presented it and how it's obviously working out. But I just think in my mind, could they strategically map that out? Again, though, I kind of underestimated the popularity of the product to begin with, which I assume Nintendo would some sort of data or some way of finding out how many of these do we need? What's our demand going to look like? I have no doubt that they were there's no reason to produce too many of these.
Yeah.
Let's produce an amount, let's spend what we need to produce the amount we think we need. If people then want more, hey, great, we'll make more. But let's not overdo it and have a supply that's not moving, because what's the benefit of that? The idea of creating a sellout as a marketing tool, maybe for a big company like that that's done it before, they know the path and they know they can do it. It just seems like a risky move to me.
Yeah, I think there's always risk involved. But you see how people are reacting to the fact that they can't have it. It's not in stores. What? I need it. I need it now.
I guess the question of the day for you, personally, does a product selling out make you want it more?
I think it's just human nature. Why do people want this so badly? Obviously, it must be amazing, right? If this is so amazing, I should probably have this thing too, Even if you didn't have a demand for it before, now you're like, seems pretty cool. And then suddenly, the psychology of it is you're now waiting for this thing to be available so you can buy it. So...
Yeah, I absolutely think it. I can think of examples of where I was looking to buy something online. Maybe it's on sale, and I'm going back and forth. I don't know. And then in the time I'm making the decision, the item sells out online, and I'm immediately well, now I absolutely need it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Before I wasn't sure, but now that I see this piece of information that many people want it and grabbed it, now I know it's a good deal, and now I need it right now.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't buy one from the scalpers on eBay for hundreds of dollars. I think that's just stupid. But,
that's crazy.
Yeah. But waiting for it to come out and paying, what everybody else is paying for it, I have no problem doing that. And that's the name of the game.
Yeah. And around this time of year, which, this is why you release products like this time of year, you get these then news stories of lines around buildings or, shoppers talking about how much they want to get it as a gift. And it's obviously free publicity and marketing, pushing that product even more, exposing it to people who may not have even heard about it. The tornado keeps building.
Yeah. They announced it in July. I'm sure they probably had the ability to sell this thing earlier in the year, but why would you do that? Because by now it would have fizzled out, right? So you release it a couple weeks before Black Friday, and then, look, you've got Black Friday, the biggest holiday shopping season of the year.
Like I said, when you lay out the timeline, it sounds like this amazing master plan. And it's worked, but we all do know, this is products becoming hot and selling out is just a staple of this time of year, right? It happens pretty much every year. I'm kind of surprised it was this product, but, from Cabbage Patch Kids to Tickle Me Elmo, there's always a story about some sort of toy or product that becomes the hot thing that everybody needs to have or people are rushing to stores to find. It could also be Turbo Man from the movie Jingle All the Way.
It might as well be. That is the perfect example of how this kind of thing works. He waited. He thought he was going to get that Turbo Man. Now he's fighting Sinbad for that one last one that is out there in the world. It's crazy how people get when they can't have something. It's funny, I was just looking at the paper yesterday, and at Bed Bath & Beyond, they have the Atari version of this Nintendo, and they have the Sega version, right? And they're actually a little cheaper than the Nintendo one by $20. But I guarantee you, A, they'll have plenty of supply, and B, nobody's going to be clamoring for it. those will not have the impact that the Nintendo will.
No, and I remember even like a year ago, my mom picked up one of those Atari versions, and I kind of played for 2 seconds, and I'm like, nah, this isn't that great. But it's funny, it was never a big deal. It was just like an item you found in the aisle of Bed Bath & Beyond.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of strategy behind what they did, whether or not you want to call it genius or not, you know.
Very savvy, Nintendo. I will say I want one. You know, I don't know if I'll get one immediately or get one in the future, but I also think by June, nobody will ever mention the NES Classic Edition again.
Probably not. Well, they probably won't even mention it after the holidays, you know. I mean, the reality is the games have a short shelf life in terms of attention span, you know what I mean?
It's just such a gimmicky product because it's, you know, it's all something old packaged as new again, and people play it and have fun for a while, and then it'll just fall out of the collective memory. You know, I don't think it's going to have any sort of lasting impact, but fun for the holidays.
Buzz, just like Pokemon Go. Now where is it?
Pokemon what?
Pokemon what? Pokemon went?
So with the NES Classic Edition bringing the past into the present and giving new life to old games, we thought we'd have some fun by sharing our top 5 NES Classic games. So let's dive into our picks.
Now you're playing with power.
That was a clip from a video introducing consumers to the NES Classic Edition, which Nintendo calls the most nostalgic gaming console ever. Is it? The NES Classic comes preloaded with 30 mostly legendary 8-bit games, and of those 30, we're going to tell you which ones crack our personal top 5 favorite lists. So let's hit start on this puppy and save the princess.
So anyway, Patrick, we do these lists every episode now, and this one is obviously the least objective of any of these lists we've done. Maybe the least informative, but the most fun. You know, it's something a little different, just us kind of reliving our own personal nostalgia a little bit. So any insight into how you picked yours, or did yours come easily to you?
Probably one of the easiest lists I've made. How about you?
Yeah, it was pretty easy for me to come up with my list too, basically because I already have all the data, you know? Here's what I played the most of these games, you know, here's the ones I spent my most time with, here's the ones I enjoyed the most. This already happened in history. So all I'm doing is kind of reporting on what already happened. So let's go, Patrick. What's your number 5 best NES Classic game?
Donkey Kong. And Donkey Kong is considered to be the earliest video game with a storyline that visually unfolds on screen. Just a little history there. In the game Mario, originally named Mr. Video and then Jumpman. Did you know that?
I didn't.
Yeah, he must rescue a damsel in distress named Pauline, originally named the Lady. And everybody knows this, right? But today, you know, Donkey Kong, people know it. It's like the name Nintendo, you know? I mean, you know, it's the 5th most popular arcade game among collectors. So you know it's a big one, probably one of the reasons why they included it.
Yeah, that was one I was kind of surprised to see on the list because I think, as you had mentioned before, I kind of associated more with Atari.
Some of those games, you know, were used and then had licensing rights on different consoles over the years, so it's not necessarily associated with Nintendo itself or exclusively, you know what I mean?
But I will say, Donkey Kong, one of the best titles of all time.
Oh, yeah.
Who put that name together? Amazing.
So what's your number 5, Shad?
My number 5 is Super C, the sequel to Contra. This was one of my favorite 2-player games when I was younger that I used to play a lot. You know, it was fun playing with someone else in this scrolling shooter where you're just running along, blindly shooting, dying. You know, a game sticks in your head when you still remember the 10 lives code at the start, which was a modified version of the normal code you would use on Konami games. This one was just right, left, down, up, A, B start. And instead of getting 30 lives like the traditional code would give you, this one gave you 10. Other than one other game on my list, I would say it's my second favorite 2-player game. Get to my first in a little bit.
Yeah, that game was great, and it had lots of replayability because you were playing with friends at the same time. you know, what people today call multiplayer co-op games, which was uncommon back then. But Contra's on my list, or Super C, I should say, is on my list. So I agree with you. It's a great game and has a lot of nostalgic qualities to it for me, for sure.
It's a good one. Moving on to number 4, what do you got?
The Legend of Zelda. You know, I mentioned it in the intro. I could go on and on about this, but the personal experience that I mentioned earlier says it all. You know, people playing it for days on end. And to top that off, the original Legend of Zelda is the 4th best-selling NES game of all time. So a little history.
Not surprising, but I didn't know that.
Yeah, you know, being Link, trying to save the princess. It's always cool.
I think it's a title almost anyone is familiar with. Also, my number 4, I think, as you perfectly referenced with your story in the intro when we were talking, one of the most addictive Nintendo games ever made. It's a slower game, but once you got into it, man, you were in it. You know what I mean? You were just immersed in that world and those quests. And like you said, getting to those save points, not losing your game and getting to the end of it. I mean, once you started, it really became a mission.
Oh, yeah. Legend of Zelda, great game.
Our shared number 4 pick. So what's your number 3?
My number 3 was Contra, so we had a little overlap there. But I will add this to the Contra line. It was voted number 1 by the gaming website IGN as being the toughest game to beat.
Pretty crazy. Of all the games out there, I wouldn't think that.
Yeah, because I felt like I beat that one pretty easy. But I don't know. Maybe it was because I had the power-up, the cheat.
Yeah, I guess if you're using the cheat code, it makes it a little easier.
Yeah, but a great multiplayer game. What's your number 3, Shad?
Well, my number 3 is a game that everyone knows and loves, and it still makes a lot of Halloween costumes. Super Mario Brothers, the original.
Yeah.
Some people say number 3 is the better Super Mario Brothers, but for me, it's the original. That's the one that I, played to the ground. For sheer playtime alone, it gets a spot on the list. It's Nintendo's signature game. It's pretty much played by everyone. Age, gender, nothing mattered. Everybody at least knows Mario, has probably played Mario. It's just that game, It's the game that made Nintendo, and I spent a lot of time on it, rescuing that princess, finishing the game, seeing those fireworks. So it makes the number 3 spot on my list.
I agree with you. Super Mario is actually number 1 on my list. I feel like if this isn't on anyone's list, you're a human incapable of feeling.
Or you didn't really play Nintendo. You were just somebody who's like, that's too popular. I'm never playing Super Mario.
Yeah, you might be a robot because that appeals to everyone's sense of accomplishment when you can save the princess and slide down that flagpole.
You always try to jump over the top.
Yeah, try to get higher on the flag post because, think you got more points or something. But the one thing I will add to that, though, is did you know the entire franchise has sold over 500 million copies, making it the best-selling video game franchise of all time?
Not surprising.
I mean, you still see Super Mario games come out almost every year. The franchise is a goldmine, but the original makes me a plumber at heart.
It may be the most playable game of all time. I think even now with the NES Classic, it'll get a lot of play. And a lot of maybe young people who haven't played it before will find themselves hooked. So you're getting the system, huh? You're planning on getting one of these, by the way.
Yeah, I hope so. I will say this, though. I read that the cords for the game pads are like way too short.
And if you look at the actual picture on Amazon, you see it. It's like a foot long.
Yeah. Back then, you sat close to the TV, right, to play it. And now TVs are so big and they're on your walls and stuff. It's just not humanly possible to sit that close, unless you want to go blind.
Yeah. Well, even back then, the cords were like 6 feet long or 3 feet long.
Yeah.
So you can buy an extender for these, I guess, but it sucks to then have to buy another thing,
Well, and just like every gaming system, I think they should provide 2 controllers. I mean, why do they not provide 2 controllers for any gaming system?
Yeah, it's ridiculous, right?
It's so dumb. Who has ever bought a gaming system and only plays it themselves and they don't want to play with someone else?
Maybe now it's more common, I don't know, but you just think I don't know, it's such a bleed the consumer thing. You should at least put 2 in there.
Yeah. So what's your next on your list, Shad?
Number 2 for me is what I think is the best 2-player game of all time. The one I spent the most time playing with other people and had the most fun playing, and just one of my favorite video games of all time, which is Tecmo Bowl.
Yeah.
The Nintendo's football game. There was Tecmo Bowl and there was Super Tecmo Bowl. This was my favorite game to play with somebody else.
I was never very good at it, though.
I don't even know that it was hugely skillful. You'd have stuff like you could throw a 100-yard pass, and then they'd cut to like a video game footage of somebody's hands just reaching up and catching it. So ridiculous, like crazy things could happen, but that was part of the fun of the game. And I even at one point when I was in college dug out my old Nintendo from home and brought it back just so we could play this game. And people were really into it. And that was like 10, 15 years later.
That didn't make it onto my list, but I do remember that game, and I do remember sucking horribly. Every time I played that game, I'm pretty sure... This is probably why I didn't make it on my list, because everybody beat me every time I played it. I don't have fond memories.
That's every game for me, though. If I excluded games on that basis, I'd have nothing on my list. I was one of the worst players of video games. Of everyone I know, I was good at nothing.
And I think that's one of the reasons why I have a hard time playing any of the sports franchises even today. Because if you have any kind of skill whatsoever, like knowing how to make passes or to shoot a basket in the game, you're going to beat me. Because I don't really know all of the controller functions for that. I guess that kind of dates me a little bit. It doesn't have just 2 red buttons, A, B. So
what's your number? Where are we at? Your number 2 or your number 1?
Well, this would be my number 2. We overlapped. My number 1 is Super Mario Brothers. But the next on my list, I would say, would be Excite Bike.
Great pick.
Yeah, I loved Excite Bike because it was one of the first console video games that allowed you to create your own map and track. And then once you were done creating it, you could race on that dirt bike course. Unheard of back then, to actually create something within a game and then be able to play it, which makes it one of my favorite of all time. I was so excited when I saw that they were including that on the NES Classic because I have fond memories of that. Even though it was very glitchy, like every other game, it was a great game.
That is a great game, and I'd say that game is just a lot of fun. And you're right, the way you could create something that you raced around was, kind of unheard of at that time. I can't think of anything else that was quite like that.
Yeah, now you've got games like that all over the place.
I remember having a lot of fun playing that. That's an honorable mention. Didn't crack my list. It's probably like number 6. But strangely enough, it's probably, if I get the NES Classic Edition, it's probably one of the games I most look forward to playing again. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a great pick. And like I said, just barely missed my list. But I was excited to see that one with the 30 games included here, too.
So what's last on your list, Shad?
The game I spent the most time playing, the game I enjoyed the most, I thought it was the funnest, the most creative game, and just generally probably my favorite game of all time, which is Punch-Out! Formerly known as Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! This was a game I spent endless hours mastering, trying to beat Mike Tyson, who, like I said, now is somebody different, I think because of licensing or whatever that happened a while back. But getting to him and then beating him and figuring out all these different tricks and strategies to beat these different fighters who range from Glass Joe to King Hippo to Piston Honda. All creative characters they made up. Follows this Rocky narrative where you're this tiny fighter fighting these huge guys, but endless hours of fun playing this game, and I thought it was just the best time I had, most hours put in, so it had to be number 1 on my list.
That is a great, great game. It is one of those that you could play for a long period of time, and it had a lot of memorable characters in it, like you had mentioned. And it's funny how just a simple thing like the branding of that game, was originally Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! I don't know if that led to the success of that game or how widely played it was, but the fact that they had to take the name Mike Tyson out of that for whatever licensing reasons, it's kind of funny.
Yeah, I think it added to definitely the marketing of it in that time period of the 80s and 90s when Tyson was huge. And there were a lot of games at that point that started having, athletes' names on them or like those kind of things to sell them, those kind of tie-ins.
Yeah, that might even be one of the first ones, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and which is something we still see like crazy today, with like EA's Madden games and stuff like that. So much athlete tie-ins with video games. One last thing I'll mention about Punch-Out! Is it just had such unique, character to it, which you look at a game like Super Mario or Legend of Zelda also had, where you had these created characters and worlds that were pretty interesting, whereas a lot of original Nintendo games were generic. Mm-hmm. You're talking like Defender or Centipede didn't have that personality to them. Punch-Out! Was a game that had that just in spades.
Well, yeah, and just like what made Donkey Kong successful, it was the first game with that storyline, that narrative. Mm-hmm. Those are the games that become memorable and that people really gravitate towards. You look at the games today, they've built franchises around these characters and these storylines. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Entertainment and marketing alike, story matters. It makes a difference in like selling things and the memorability of things, how much they stick in your brain. Story plays a huge role in that. So those are our definitive lists. Some great titles on there, some good overlap. Let's jump into our top takeaways.
Here's the human word for today, Shad. Tease. Teasing your customers can produce insane results. Just look at Nintendo and their ability to tease customers just enough that people are salivating at the opportunity to fork over $59.99 for a system that is over 30 years old. Sure, you may have some nostalgia built into the demand for this product, but a lot of what makes it in such high demand is the lack of supply. Cue the tease. Nintendo is great at delivering a limited supply and producing a lot of demand. Human beings, especially Americans, don't like to be told they can't have something. As soon as you make something hard to get, you can rest assured that people are going to be out there and they're going to want it more. And while in theory it should, this isn't always linked to high quality items. Just take a look at any subpar Black Friday deal out there where consumers are busting through department store doors with fury and franticity, trademarking. The only word of caution that I can give businesses that choose the path of teasing customers, tread lightly. Because if you don't plan it carefully, you may leave your customers with a bad taste in their mouths. And no business wants that, unless you're selling Harry Potter every flavored jelly beans.
Which, who doesn't want those?
Yeah, I mean, booger, earwax, rotten egg, vomit flavor. You can't go wrong.
No, those pretty much sell themselves.
Yeah, everybody wants a little vomit in their mouth.
But it's great. It's a great top takeaway, and it shows you what a, fine line walking it is when you try some of these tactics.
So what's your top takeaway?
Well, taking things in a slightly different direction, I'd say my top takeaway is level up by harnessing the power of perception. When people perceive that a product is demanded or desired, it increases their own demand and desire for the product. As you mentioned before, Patrick, it's human nature. We inherently see value in what others desire. So beyond creating a fake sellout scenario, which is a really bad idea that will probably never actually work, what can a brand do to build in-demand perception and increase desire? The easiest answer? Use the greatest resource your brand has, your best customers. Think of creative and inspiring ways to get them to share the reasons why they need your product or service, and why others should too. Like Little Mac fighting King Hippo, tap into your brand's greatest strength to create a shared perception that will propel your product to the next level. Level up by harnessing the power of perception.
Or the power of Nintendo's Power Glove.
Or you can just create a miniature version of a product you've created before and sell it at Christmas time. McDonald's could sell a small version of the Big Mac.
Ah, Big Mac slider sounds pretty tasty.
Yeah, I'd grab a Big Mac slider.
You would eat one?
I get like 5 of those.
You could call it the Little Mac, and then you could combine.
Tie it in with Punch Out.
Yes.
God, that's brilliant. You buy a Little Mac for $100 and you get a free NES Classic with it.
Like, I'm sorry, we're out of Little Macs. What?
They're so tiny. How would you run out?
I do love that tagline, though. Punch out your taste buds with Little Mac.
That's amazing.
Ah.
You get McDonald's on the phone.
Ring,
Get
ring.
'em both.
Ring, ring, McDonald's. Hey, we've got something for you.
The podcast continues to be an endless resource of marketing ideas for big brands.
Yeah. I don't know how we got on McDonald's, but, whatever. Nintendo, McDonald's.
No, I think the general is scrap our other takeaways. The final takeaway is take an old product and make it smaller.
Ah.
Yeah, Nintendo found the recipe for success.
Well, everyone, that's it for today's episode. You can find current and past episodes of the podcast on the new and improved speakinghuman.com, where you can also find more great marketing-related articles, podcasts, and videos. Check it out.
Email us with your thoughts on today's show. Tell us why our lists of top NES Classic games are way off. Or toss us any questions or comments. Feedback@speakinghuman.com. That's feedback@speakinghuman.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Speaking Human. Catch you then, humans.
Speaking Human.
Great, I knew it. I should never do that.